And here we are for the toes. We finally worked our way out to them after working from the center on the torso, down the legs, to the lower legs, to the ankles, out the feet, and now to the toes. So you can see that these don't really look like toes. So we have a lot of refinement to do, and really a lot of it is just blocking the right volumes in. It's a little bit like the fingers. In fact, it's probably easier than the fingers, really. I mean, toes aren't especially complicated, and their articulations are very simple. And so a lot of this first section of the time lapse is me just working at level 1, getting the volumes back in place, because as you know, just looking at your own feet, the toes really do touch each other for the most part, and so we really need to get volume back into the ends. Right now I'm just stepping through all the toes, making polygroups just like I would do for the fingers, because polygroups are important, and it'll allow us to hide all these guys as we go subsequently through and work on the inner sides of them. Okay, toes more or less kind of converge in like this, right? It's almost like you're wearing a pair of shoes, pair of pointy shoes, and they all come in and converge on the middle toe. The middle toe is usually, or the second toe is usually longest. Yeah, so the analogy to the hands is thumb for the big toe, index, second, third, fourth, and fifth finger. Okay, and so we actually have one less joint in the same way as the thumb in the big toe. Okay, this quick pull is to get this receding gesture to the little toes. This is going to go even further, and in fact this line has to really go pretty far back. This guy is quite a bit too long right now. He really is just going to tuck in like that little mutant he is at the very end of the foot. Okay, so you guys are all supplied with the reference for this, so I took some good shots of the feet, so you should be able to resolve some of this without too much trouble. Okay, big toe sticks up here, and then the rest kind of sit at their own level, tucking down. These guys almost claw onto the ground, whereas the big toe sticks up. Right, so I'm looking at the gesture between the knuckle and the end of the toe for the big toe, and then you have the different knuckles going down the different joints. So this is all just establishing those contours. Okay, so here I'm just adjusting the proportions of the different joints almost in the same way that we do in the fingers. Is we do kind of 2/3 or half and half. So the longest joint is the first one, and then we divide the second one into roughly 2/3. The shortest third at the top, and then a middle third. Okay, this whole time I am trying to do both feet with symmetry on. Right, I haven't really touched any of the bottom of the toes, the end of the feet. So with posable symmetry on, up in the transform menu at level 1, I want to kind of keep them in lockstep, so I can try to save myself from having to do as much work twice as possible. Things will fall out of symmetry a little bit towards at the higher resolutions, but we'll get as far as we can using posable symmetry. Okay, and now it really is just contouring the toes. Okay, so trying to get the convexity this way, and also most of the toes, all the toes tend to have a big ball at the tip, right, and then they taper in down here, and especially the smaller toes. Big pad at the toe, and then kind of a narrow middle, right? So that's what I'm trying to get here. Okay, it's kind of stuffing the pinky toe over towards the others. Now, the next thing is to, what I'm doing here is I'm really pushing the metatarsals of the last three toes down, right? Because we have a nice flat plane out here. Beautiful cross-hatching where all the metatarsals kind of line up. Fifth metatarsal comes along here and sits quite flat with the ground. That's kind of what we stand on. That's the outer bit of the arch of the foot, right? And so I'm kind of taking that and pushing it down and extending that up to the next two toes inwards. And then the first and the second toe tend to have a ridge. The metatarsal tends to ascend more vertically. Okay, now just using the smooth brush kind of gently to take off some of the hard edges from our kind of non-smooth subdivision. Those are still hanging around down here. Okay, just looking at, notice for yourself when you're working through this, the angles that the different joints take as they come off the foot. Because it almost looks like these toes are gripping the ground. You know, this one kind of, you know, it's just natural. The nail kind of faces horizontal or even a little bit vertical. And then these guys have their digits coming down and really planting strongly the ball, the pad of the toe on the ground. So much so that actually the underside of the first phalanx is not even touching the ground. Okay, just a little bit more of the same. I was just tucking in this this angle on the toes with a little smooth. Gonna have to do some work in here to refine this, to kind of open it up. And almost like the, again, like the fingers, you have the pad, the under pad on the ball of the toe with the webbing coming forward a little bit. So we have to look at how that's arranged. Just trying to build up a little mass to the metatarsal, the fourth metatarsal. So the pad of the big toe, and then just kind of carving away some of this down here to give that characteristic plant here, and then bulge out here as well. Just trying to get the shape of the tip right, and the knuckle. And I'm looking back and forth to see if my posable symmetry is working or not. It's kind of working. We'll just put it that way. There may be some repeat work done on the far foot. Not terribly exciting, so I'll just try to go through fairly quickly. You can see as I hide these, just look at the contour down here as it lifts off the ground. That's what I was explaining a little bit earlier, that this arch of the toe doesn't necessarily come down and sit on the ground. Okay, right now I'm really comparing the bottom of my foot against the horizontal here to make sure that this is kind of flat on the ground, and then make sure my toes go flat on the ground too. So I'm going to do a big kind of pull with the move brush to get it down. Just noticing some extra gesture to the big toe, so I'm moving them in a little bit Again, this is something that's good to have your topological masking on for the toes, so you can move this without influencing the neighboring toes. Just trying to get the contact almost right. It's too much right now, but we'll have to taper this guy off a little bit and start the nails. So I've turned symmetry off for this and just going to do the nails twice. They don't take long really once you get the workflow in. So building up around the bed, kind of tucking that a little bit, and then you'll see we'll invert and push down, carve up, and the topology is really loose on the toes, even though we are still at subdivision 7. So I'm actually going to end up using a little bit of pinch brush to just tighten these edges, because that's really jagged and not very nice for the crispness that you expect on the toes going into the nail bed. Okay, so that's what I've done. I've just gone in and I'll just step back a couple frames and you can see the magic pinch brush up here. Go in and just tightening that up. Pinch brush is the poor man's resolution. If you don't have enough resolution in your mesh, then you can get away with that sometimes. Okay, as I'm sitting in here, I'm actually going in and looking kind of carefully at all the kind of smaller planes that are built up in between these joints, because there's not a huge amount of wrinkles and folds and stuff that happen on the toes, but there's little bundles of skin that kind of bulge up and tiny little, small little creases that kind of mark the transition between some of these joints. So you have to pay attention to those if you're going to try to get to sell the toes really well. And nobody's going to say, man, those are lovely toes that you put on your model. People just don't say that. But they'll tell you if they look horrible. You know, if you don't do them and they're just little stubs, then they'll say, man, you're too lazy to finish your feet. But if you finish them and make them beautiful, they'll be like, they won't even notice. They'll just look at something else on your model, which I suppose is the goal. Say, it's a little convexity. Same thing for the third toe, roughly gripping the ground, the same kind of gesture as the first, and then kind of nail in here. Noticing some things to adjust on the first toe, specifically the depth of all this the stuff around the nail. These little toe nails get really embedded in kind of in the body of the toes, so just be prepared to really bulk it up around there in a way that you didn't have to do for the hands. Okay, almost exactly the same approach, just building up around the nail. Just cut a little bit away at the base to give a little bit of protrusion to the actual nail itself. And paying careful attention, almost like the fingernails, to get this interchange between depression down here and then where it sticks out coming around the corner. Right? Have to be very careful. Okay, success, more or less. And moving on, let's plow into the third. Nails get smaller, toes get smaller, and eventually we'll get to that tiny little fifth toe and see some crazy shape to him. So again, got a nice little pinch there. That's allowing me to keep this sharp when the resolution is pretty low. Okay, there we go, kind of really tucking him in. And this guy is just like a massive mound and then a tiny little nail in here that sticks out. Even smaller than what I just drew. And when you get to the last toe, you have to start to pay attention to what's happening on the outside here, because that is visible on the outside of the foot where it's in profile. You have to do a little bit of work there that we didn't have to do on the other toes because they were touching each other. Okay, well that's it. We're getting pretty close to done for the toes. Where I'm going to go from here is I'm going to take this and I'm going to switch this over to the other foot, and I will go into a little bit deeper look at refining the foot and the ankle. In the final space, and that's about it. Checking it out, saying, hey, nice toes, man, nice toes. Sadly, they only take up about 10 pixels or so when you're doing an HD render of the full figure. And then actually when you want to do the interesting renders, it only takes up as kind of from the knees up, and the toes don't show up anymore. So spend as much time as you have on them, but you have to do some work on them to at least block them into the right volumes. Okay, so that's it for the toes. We'll be back in a minute with a look at kind of the volume and the structure of the foot itself.